I read something a few years ago which I found really helpful in this regard, and it's called the ABC of Christian thinking. It was by a guy called Selwyn Hughes. Anyone remember Selwyn Hughes? A Christian counsellor, and he used this model, and he said that we tend to operate in these kind of ways. We have an event, something happens. You find out that two of your friends have gone for coffee or gone out and left you and haven't invited you. They went and enjoyed themselves, but you didn't get invited. And what you believe underneath it, the underlying thought, kicks in at that point. So you think, well, I knew I wasn't very valuable. I'm clearly not very good. I'm clearly being rejected. And you're not basing that on any kind of fact. You're just basing that on this underlying thought and feeling that goes on. It could be that those two people were meeting up to plan your surprise birthday party. But you're sitting there and immediately you think, it's because I'm not loved. I'm no good. People don't really want me. I'm not really valuable. And so what happens is you then respond. You respond with an action. And often, if your thinking is unhealthy, you will respond unhealthily. So what you'll do is you'll withdraw from those people. You'll run away. You'll kind of put them at a distance, or you'll kind of be passive-aggressive next time you see them, right? Or you'll barge in there and start kind of going, why are you two doing that and leaving me out? And of course, you damage the relationship, right? This is what happens. You could pick any one of these incidents, right? Okay, you could pick it on the football pitch, and I shall look at no one in this direction over here, boys, right? The football pitch comes on, and because in a sense your head says, I must win at all costs, the moment that someone, tackles you who's about 10 years younger than you, right, you immediately respond and react and think, right, I'm going to get stressed and shout about it. Yeah, the football pitch always reveals who you really are. Yeah, if you want to see underneath it, it reveals your underlying thoughts. And what happens is over time, we develop defense mechanisms. So what we'll sometimes do, we might be dishonest. I know, truthfully, I will quite often, because I suppose underneath it, I haven't really got confidence in who I am in Christ. What I'll do is I'll just embellish stories about myself. When I went fishing and I caught a fish, and it was this big, right? That kind of thing, right? Or, when I was at work, I was absolutely amazing and I was the best teacher that ever taught in the history of the universe. You just tell a story, right? Or you kind of, that's obviously silly, but you leave out bits of the story that kind of look negative on you, don't you? And why do you do that? It's a defense mechanism. Because you're constantly protecting yourself, because in your heart, in your mind, you don't really believe the truth about who Christ has said you are and who you are in him. What about this one? All right? What about denial? We sometimes just deny. We literally just say, I'm not going to choose to think about this. I'm not going to face reality. And that's what some people do. They just bury their head in the sand and they choose to ignore because really they don't have confidence in Christ. And so they just think, right, I'm just going to block everything out. What about this? Fantasy. They escape the real world and live in an imaginary world. This is why people have problems with pornography, for example, because they're running away from the real world because they're living in a fantasy. They're living in a fantasy. Why can't I stop doing that? It's because fundamentally your thought life needs to be readjusted by Christ. What about this? Emotional insulation. Right? Emotional insulation. You will withdraw yourself. You think, do you know what? I can't deal with this. I'll just go at a distance. How many do we know people like this, right? We know them. When they're struggling, they back off. And they choose not to engage with us. They choose not to talk about what they're struggling with or feeling. They distance themselves. You think, I used to be really good friends with that person, and somehow now it feels like there's a distance between us. And the answer is, something's going on in their mind. What about this? Displacement. This is a classic one, right? This happens a lot. I think I'm prone to this, right? I put my anger and my frustration, I blame somebody else. It's somebody else's problem. It's somebody else's fault. It's the church's fault. It's the government's fault. It's that person over there. If they didn't have done that to me, my life would be different. And these are all mechanisms we have. They're defense mechanisms. All right? What, have I got any others? Yeah. Or rationalisation. We make excuses for what we do. We say, it's not my fault, it's not my fault. And that's because we are programmed to think in particular ways, and often really unhealthy ways. Wouldn't it be nice to live a life where you can say, do you know what? I'm easygoing. You can say stuff about me, and at the end of the day, it's probably true. It's okay. You know, I always think as a leader, I always wonder what people must say about me behind closed doors. Because let's be honest, you'll talk about me, right? Of course you do. Everybody would, right? And I'm not saying that as a big-headed thing. I just think you do, right? You comment. And in the end, as a leader, you have to be really secure in Christ, to know that in the end of the day, I am who I am in God. Otherwise, if I'm worried about what everyone's saying about me, and I think, oh, did I preach well and people are commenting, or did I lead well, or did I handle that situation rightly, or have I done that right, my life would be a gibbering mess. And I would start behaving in this way, right? And you see church leaders that do this. And I want to encourage you that if you are in a situation where you're finding your reactions to situations are not Christ-like, I want to tell you the issue is it's what you're thinking about. It's what's going on inside your brain. And the Lord, I believe, wants to reset that because, let's go back. What happens is that in God, if you can develop a disputing belief, you will have a new action and a new emotion. So in that instance where you see your two friends having a coffee and you've not been invited, if your response and your reaction to that is different to your natural one, you say, do you know what? I'm loved by God. He's got everything under control. I don't need, it doesn't matter. And so you think, well, okay, isn't it wonderful that my two friends are able to build their relationship? Isn't that wonderful? Isn't it wonderful that their relationship is strengthening? You don't see it from a selfish point of view. You see it from a broader perspective. You know, when people come and they say to me, oh, this isn't good in the church, I think, well, isn't that wonderful that people feel that they can comment on the church? Because maybe there's some truth in that. I haven't got to be defensive. You know, no one's standing here claiming to be perfect. I'm not standing here claiming to think I've got it all right. You may not have picked this up yet, but River Church is very far from perfect. Sorry, it isn't. It's a long way off being perfect. But I haven't got to be defensive about that. Just got to be, well, this is who the Lord's made us to be. And that confidence doesn't come from trying to tell yourself that you're wonderful. It comes from knowing Christ, which is why when we've been talking about this morning over and over again, to know Jesus, if you know Christ more, you realise that if you know Christ more, that it's very easy to start having a disputing belief because you're not basing it in yourself. You're not trying to convince yourself, I'm good, I can do this, I've got this. You think, I haven't got this, I'm not good, I'm probably pretty rubbish, but it's okay because Christ loves me.